The crowd to life, the Quaker City String Band. Our next float is representing the arts, the fine arts represented by the Painter's Palette, masks of comedy and tragedy and other symbols. Now on this float, we have some folks here. Ah, is that Grover?
Grover Washington.
It's our buddy Grover Washington Jr.
I got a big kiss from
Did you get a kiss?
Yes.
All right, good. Christine finds out about that. His lovely wife, Colleen Dewhurst, Peter Nero, the Philly Pops. There's Peter. You see Peter's back there, riding on the float. The fine arts represented. Little circus, Lisa.
Complete with the calliope, right? Oh, listen to those circus sounds. Look who's clapping his hands on top of that calliope there. Who is that? That's Mickey Mouse.
Hey!
The Big Apple Circus, Dave. Antique calliope from Disney World, Lake Buena Vista, Florida. Oh, Mickey's got the rhythm.
It's a small world after all.
Where did Mickey go? He's been taking lessons from Grover.
Now the young people come to life. Mickey will get them going. We had lost a few people. You see some of the empty stands there. We lost a few people with that last downpour, but some of them are starting to come back now. Persistent group here. The way the original founders of this country were persistent. Oh my goodness. Talk about tall stories.
Boy.
The Big Apple Circus.
They're just about reaching our level up here, Dave. Daddy long legs.
I've often wondered about doing that. The thought passes my mind very, very quickly about trying that. Then I dismiss it right away.
That does take considerable skill. I can't imagine being up that high on stilts.
Have to have a little manual dexterity. We'll take a commercial break. We'll be right back. Constitution Day, our parade. Much more to come.
Now, the sale that cuts your floor covering cost in half. It's Spectrum Carpet's biggest ever half-price sale.
Half price?
Up to half price on many national brand installed and do-it-yourself carpets. Up to half price on room-size carpet remnants. Up to half price on wall-to-wall carpet. Yes, at Spectrum Carpets, you'll find half-price savings on more carpet and more carpet remnants than anywhere. So cut your floor covering cost in half during Spectrum Carpet's half-price sale.
Something's happening on Channel 6. Something's happening. Must have been that star I wished upon. Sure is electrifying. I do believe something's happening, and this is it. Something's happening on Channel 6.
We lived in this house together, had children, started a business together, and then we separated and had to get through a divorce together.
Most people who come to Jacoby and Myers try to be reasonable, and they want to be protected. My job is to make sure they are.
The lawyers were a big help, kept our skirmishes from becoming battles, and they helped us decide what was fair.
Something else about Jacoby and Myers. We don't think the attorney's fees should be the biggest problem in your divorce.
It wasn't easy, but we're just fine.
Jacoby and Myers.
You called the Fiji Islands?
I wanted to explore.
Who are you, Ponce de Leon?
Where's the dog?
Guam. Why don't you give him a call?
4C, the official breadcrumb of the Davis family.
Constitution Day, and we're back at the site of the big parade, and boy, it's getting better and better. The skies are brightening, the floats are brightening, the costumes are even more colorful. We can see in the distance there, this next float coming up, that's entertainment. And as it slowly approaches...
And it's doing that, just slowly approaching. And that is part of our problem. There we have some of our entertainers.
Oh, yeah.
Yakov Smirnoff, the Russian comedian, and Dean Jones, known from all of the, of course, Disney films, both part of our celebration. A story with, I think it's appropriate for Constitution Day. A young Russian comic comes to this country, finds success.
That's the gentleman in the top hat and the black tails on the piano there. providing the music for our entertainers.
And we're told that just last July 4th, Yakov became a citizen. So he's now an official citizen of the United States. Hello, Dean. Sit down and play the piano, Dean. Do something. Somebody play. He's getting ready, isn't he? Who is that? Roddy McDowell? No, it's not Roddy McDowell.
No,
Looks like Roddy McDowell. So. Roddy's piano playing days are over. That's entertainment. We were supposed to have some Brigham Young University dancers along with that group. Now, I don't know if because of the rain we've lost them or not. Now, this is the way to prepare. Look at this. That's the American way.
That's
tradition.
The way to watch a parade.
Protect yourself. Don't let it ever interrupt with your lunch. He's got his little carton of something there. Is it a sandwich or something? What's he got there?
Got a little box
moving
drink.
his umbrella now. All right, the rains have lessened. They've just about stopped again. And that's a good view. Along the line.
See more smiles on our spectators' faces now.
We're all a little soggy around the edges, but we're having a heck of a time.
It did brighten suddenly, though, didn't it?
Yes, I don't want to talk about it, Lisa, because the minute we do, it'll change back to a hard downpour.
We'll
again.
jinx ourselves.
The past 3 or 4 days, we've been attempting to steer the AccuWeather forecast so it would turn out just perfectly today. We were a day short. Yesterday would have been ideal for the parade, as far as the weather is concerned. Again, we have a break as the SEPTA buses, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of them, going across, heading up JFK and there's a long, long break in this parade. I can see something as we look down 15th Street. Something is moving in our direction.
Slowly heading our way.
Exactly what it is at this
particular
particular
point. There we go.
I'm not quite sure. That's one of the things when you do a parade like this. Of course, there's a line of march, and everyone has a pretty good idea of who is supposed to follow whom, but from time to time that varies. And then when you deal with the rain delay and other problems, things sometimes get out of order, or sometimes some of the groups have to pull out for various reasons.
Dave Roberts, this is Jim Gardner. I'm going to interrupt you for just a minute.
Yeah, Jim.
Nice to talk to you, but we're going to pull away for just a little while and go to Action News reporter Dave Frankel at Independence Hall, where President Reagan has now arrived. Dave Frankel, of course, the president involved in his own constitutional controversy with the nomination of Robert Bork, and I do understand through the Associated Press, Dave, that Reagan will not talk specifically about Bork at this ceremony, but will when he appears at the fundraiser for John Hines.
Yeah, the president, Jim, has not appeared here before the crowd, but the preparations are obviously ready for that moment. We have a color guard in place. We've seen some dignitaries already here, local and federal. Mayor Good is up here in the crowd. We saw Attorney General Edwin Meese earlier. We have not seen the president yet. It is 11:40, and I'm not sure if we're running a few minutes late. I heard that we were, but that was a few minutes ago. Now, they may have caught up. So we expect to see the president momentarily. He'll be right there at the podium, in front of the statue of George Washington, the first president, Ronald Reagan, the 40th president, and the succession that, of course, was all made possible by the Constitution. We expect that the president will make some more general constitutional and patriotic remarks here, and I think you're right, Jim, that the political remarks may be reserved for the fundraiser for John Hines.
Well, Dave, there will be a veiled reference to Robert Bork and his comments in front of Independence Hall. Of course, the Bork philosophy of the judicial restraint, and we have heard that phrase mentioned now numbers of times over the last couple of weeks, and it is our information that President Reagan will talk about judicial restraint where you are now, and then when he goes over to the Hines fundraiser, he will talk more specifically about his nominee to the Supreme Court.
Okay, well, of course, the Constitution is at the heart of the Bork nomination, both in the sense that it is the Constitution that sets up the process by which it is happening, and of course that Judge Bork's reputation and writings indicate that he is a very strict constructionist in terms of adhering to the letter of the Constitution and not varying from that letter. So it would be appropriate to hear the president talk, at least in general terms, on that subject.
Dave, I want to clear one thing up. We saw Senator Specter arrive with President Reagan and Senator John Hines a while ago at Philadelphia International Airport, and I was frankly a little surprised to see Senator Specter here, although in retrospect I can't imagine him not coming to Philadelphia with the President of the United States. But in fact, the Bork hearings are continuing in Washington in Specter's absence. I hear hail to the chief, David.
Yes, ruffles and flourishes, and that means the president should be moments away.
Of the United States, accompanied by Willard Rouse, chairman of We the People 200.
They're introducing Willard Rouse, the chairman of We the People 200. And hail to the chief.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. With so many distinguished guests, I hope you will excuse me if I single out just one. He has devoted a lifetime of service to his country and occupied one of the highest offices in our land. And recently, he stepped down to lead the nation in our bicentennial celebrations. Well, by a happy coincidence, this day that marks the 200th anniversary of the signing of our Constitution also happens to be his birthday. Today, Chief Justice Warren Burger is 80 years old. And Warren, we of the younger generation salute you. Congratulations. As we stand here today before Independence Hall, we can easily imagine that day, September 17, 1787, when the delegates rose from their chairs and arranged themselves according to the geography of their states, beginning with New Hampshire and moving south to Georgia. They had labored for 4 months through the terrible heat of the Philadelphia summer, but they knew as they moved forward to sign their names to that new document that in many ways their work had just begun. This new Constitution, this new plan of government, faced a skeptical, even hostile reception in much of the country. To look back on that time, at the difficulties faced and surmounted, can only give us perspective on the present. Each generation, every age, I imagine, is prone to think itself beset by unusual and particularly threatening difficulties. To look back on the past as a golden age when issues were not so complex and politics not so divisive, when problems did not seem so intractable. Sometimes we're tempted to think of the birth of our country as one such golden age, a time characterized primarily by harmony and cooperation. In fact, the Constitution and our government were born in crisis. The years leading up to our Constitutional Convention were some of the most difficult our nation ever endured. This young nation, threatened on every side by hostile powers, was on the verge of economic collapse. In some states, inflation raged out of control. Debt was crushing. In Massachusetts, ruinously high taxes provoked an uprising of poor farmers led by a former Revolutionary War captain, Daniel Shays. Trade disputes between the states were bitter and sometimes violent, threatening not only the economy but even the peace. No one thought him guilty of exaggeration when Edmund Randolph described the perilous state of the Confederacy. "Look at the public countenance," he said. "From New Hampshire to Georgia, are we not on the eve of war, which is only prevented by the hopes from this convention?" Yes, but these hopes were matched in many others by equally strong suspicions. Wasn't this convention just designed to steal from the states their sovereignty, to usurp their freedom so recently fought for? Patrick Henry, the famed orator of the Revolution, thought so. He refused to attend the convention, saying with his usual talent for understatement that he smelt a rat. The Articles of Confederation, all could see, were not strong enough to hold this new nation together. But there was no general agreement on how a stronger federal government should be constituted, or indeed whether one should be constituted at all. There were strong secessionist feelings in many parts of the country. In Boston, some were calling for a separate nation of New England. Others felt the 13 states should divide into 3 independent nations. And it came as a shock to George Washington, recently traveling in New England, to find that sentiment in favor of returning to a monarchy still ran strong in that region. No, it wasn't the absence of problems that won the day in 1787. It wasn't the absence of division and difficulty. It was the presence of something higher, the vision of democratic government founded upon those self-evident truths that still resounded in Independence Hall. It was that ideal, proclaimed so proudly in this hall a decade earlier, that enabled them to rise above politics and self-interest, to transcend their differences and together create this document, this Constitution that would profoundly and forever alter not just these United States, but the world. In a very real sense, it was then in 1787 that the revolution truly began. For it was with the writing of our Constitution, setting down the architecture of democratic government, that the noble sentiments and brave rhetoric of 1776 took on substance, that the hopes and dreams of the revolutionists could become a living, enduring reality. All men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Until that moment, some might have said that was just a high-blown sentiment, the dreams of a few philosophers and their hot-headed followers. But could one really construct a government, run a country with such idealistic notions? But once those ideals took root in living, functioning institutions, once those notions became a nation, well then, as I said, the revolution could really begin, not just in America, but around the world. A revolution to free man from tyranny of every sort and secure his freedom the only way possible in this world, through the checks and balances and institutions of limited democratic government. Checks and balances, limited government. The genius of our constitutional system is its recognition that no one branch of government alone could be relied on to preserve our freedoms. The great safeguard of our liberty is the totality of the constitutional system, with no one part getting the upper hand. And that's why the judiciary must be independent, and that's why it also must exercise restraint. If our Constitution has endured through times perilous as well as prosperous, it has not been simply as a plan of government, no matter how ingenious or inspired that might be. This document that we honor today has always been something more to us, filled with a deeper feeling than one of simple admiration, a feeling, one might say, more of reverence. One scholar described our Constitution as a kind of covenant. It is a covenant we've made not only with ourselves, but with all of mankind. As John Quincy Adams promised, whenever the standard of freedom and independence has been or shall be unfurled, there will be America's heart, her benedictions, and her prayers. It's a human covenant, yes, and beyond that, a covenant with the Supreme Being, to whom our founding fathers did constantly appeal for assistance. It is an oath of allegiance to that in man is truly universal, that core of being that exists before and beyond distinctions of class, race, or national origin. It is a dedication of faith to the humanity we all share, that part of each man and woman that most closely touches on the divine. And it was perhaps from that divine source that the men who came together in this hall 200 years ago drew the inspiration and strength to face the crisis of their great hopes and overcome their many divisions. After all, both Madison and Washington were to refer to the outcome of the Constitutional Convention as a miracle. And miracles, of course, have only one origin. No people, said George Washington in his inaugural address, can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than those of the United States. Every step by which they have advanced to the character of an independent nation seems to have been distinguished by some providential agency. No doubt he was thinking of the great and good fortune of this young land, the abundant and fertile continent given us far from the warring powers of Europe, the successful struggle against the greatest proof or power of that day, England, the happy outcome of the Constitutional Convention, and the debate over ratification. But he knew, too, as he also said, that there is an indissoluble union between duty and advantage, and that the guiding hand of Providence did not create this new nation of America for ourselves alone, but for a higher cause, the preservation and extension of the sacred fire of human liberty. This is America's solemn duty. During the summer of 1787, as the delegates clashed and debated, Washington left the heat of Philadelphia with his trout fishing companion, Governor Morris of Pennsylvania, made a pilgrimage to Valley Forge. 10 years before, his Continental Army had been camped there through the winter. Food was low, medical supplies non-existent. His soldiers had to go half in rags in the killing cold, their torn feet leaving bloodstains as they walked shoeless on the icy ground. Governor Morris reported that the general was silent throughout the trip. He did not confide his emotions as he surveyed the scene of past hardship. One can imagine that his conversation was with someone else, that it took more the form of prayer for this new nation, that such sacrifice be not in vain, that the hope and promise that survived such a terrible winter of suffering not be allowed to wither now that it was summer. One imagines that he also did what we do today in this gathering and celebration, what will always be America's foremost duty, to constantly renew that covenant with humanity, with a world yearning to breathe free, to complete the work begun 200 years ago, that grand, noble work that is America's particular calling, the triumph of human freedom, the triumph of human freedom under God. I have a number of times said that you may call it mysticism, but I have always believed that this land was put here to be found by a special kind of people. And may I simply say also, a man wrote me a letter, and I would call to your attention what he did to mine. You could go from here to live in another country, France, but you wouldn't become a Frenchman. You could go to Japan and live there, but you wouldn't become a Japanese. But people from every corner of the world can come to this country and become an American. And now, I think a moment ago I was given a cue, and I can think of no more fitting tribute to the Constitution's bicentennial than ringing the centennial bell, and with it will be rung bells all over the nation. Maybe that's all that we're going to ring it.
Seems clear at this point that the centennial bell may have been tolled just a bit early. But right on schedule, they are releasing some 1,500 doves of peace, at the conclusion of Ronald Reagan's speech. Dave Frankel, if you're there, I think it's probably noteworthy to say that there were two elements of President Reagan's speech, which was primarily patriotic rhetoric in the best sense of the word, that were of some significant substance, and that his mention of judicial restraint, and also he spent a good deal of time talking about the role of Providence, translated into religion, in the founding of this country, and clearly, as he sees it, in the continuance of the exercise of our freedoms. And these are two areas, of course, where President Reagan finds himself in continuing controversy. The interpretation of the First Amendment as it pertains to religious freedom, meaning prayer in schools, etc. And again, his remark about judicial restraint, and clearly he makes an allusion there to Robert Bork.
Jim, I think clearly that the reference to judicial restraint was the one bit of news that comes out of this speech. Not news in the sense that it's anything that we haven't heard before, but the president made, as you said, so a lot of political rhetoric in the best sense of the word. But the one specific target that he went after in a constitutional sense was that issue of judicial restraint, of course, against the backdrop of the nomination of Judge Robert Bork for the U.S. Supreme Court. There was a moment of embarrassment as the bells started to toll just a little early. And I think a lesser man might have been a little bit knocked by it, but the president came right back, strong as ever, made a joke, called for the ringing of the bells again, and the workers up in the bell tower frantically pulled the rope to get the bell to ring again, and of course finally it did, and that set the tone for the end of the president's remarks. He is still watching in review with We the People Chairman Willard Rouse, and there you hear the symbolic ringing of the replica Liberty Bell.
We, of course, along with all of our viewers and everyone outside, we are enjoying what is overwhelmingly a day of pomp and patriotism to mark this unique document that we call our Constitution. But I think it is also our responsibility to point out some things that smack of something less than wonderful. It struck me as I saw President Reagan behind an elaborate bulletproof glass cage sitting there with Willard Rouse, that 200 years ago, this has to be a moment of enormous satisfaction for Willard Rouse. He was brought in on an emergency basis some months ago when the We the People celebration seemed to be foundering, and today he stands in triumph with President Reagan, the climactic day of the We the People celebration, Constitution Day. And I might say that we are now 4 hours away from the moment when the Constitution was signed 200 years ago, and that moment will be marked by the appearance of former Chief Justice Warren Burger as he accepts Constitution signed by millions of children from across the United States to signify the moment of the signing of the Constitution. What a sight. Here, President Reagan will be going to the Franklin Plaza Hotel. We told you he was going to mix pomp with politics today as he now departs. He is going to be attending a big fundraiser for Senator John Hines of Pennsylvania. That at the Franklin Plaza. We will, of course, cover that live for you wherever the president goes in the Philadelphia area. Action News is there live to cover his activity. And we will follow him to the Franklin Plaza Hotel for you.
Celebrate the bicentennial of our Constitution. Diverse in custom and belief, they are united in their love of liberty. So let's welcome them now in a grand parade of America's people.
Independence Hall, framed on your right. The Bourse Building, which of course was America's first stock exchange. Well, that isn't the Bourse. The Bourse is to the left of that, but trying to figure out my Independence Mall geography. I've used to live about a block and a half from there and know it very well, but that is not the Bourse Building. The parade resumes now past Independence Hall. We will be picking up the action with David and Lisa up at the Municipal Services Building up further into Center City in just a minute, but we have seen President Reagan make his contribution to the ceremonies in front of the historic building where that historic document was signed 200 years ago today, and we'll be back with our coverage of the We the People 200 celebration Constitution Day in Philadelphia in just a moment.
How do you get through the night?
I fly on the wings of a maxi.
Always Plus Night Super, the long maxi, with panty protectors.
Wait till you see. Oh, wings. Of course.
Always Plus Night Super, amazing flaps that help keep it in place.
Ooh, what a maxi. It actually stays put.
At night?
At night.
Try Always Plus Night Super. You'll fly through the night with wings.
See what we've done for you.
Sweet dreams.